stretch marks.
In this Muñoz quote, he talks about punk, and he's basically writing about a play by someone called Richard Braca, who is a Latinx playwright. And the whole play is set kind of like in this gay nightlife economy. And these two characters are called Thing 1 and Thing 2. And Thing 1 goes, "We might have it by the DJ booth or here in welfare." They're talking about power. So we might have power by the DJ booth or here in Welfare Alley at the end up, but turn the corner and bam, you are punk ass shit, nothing. Thing 2, "No, I beg to differ. Being punk ass shit is not nothing. Being a punk is power." Thing 1, "According to whom? Not my fellas on the corner. Definitely not my folks. Power don't come in bumps or pumps, girl." And then Thing 2 says, "The power of being a punk in the world comes from knowing it's your world and the rest of these sad motherfuckers live in it and need to get to your groove. Boy pussy power." And then Thing 1 says, "Yeah, but how can you hear your beat with the wall of sound, white noise?" And then Thing 2 says, "Change the channel and stop listening to college grunge radio." So I also think, yeah, YGO also came to mind as this kind of like announcing of boy pussy power. And you can't see it, but the word boy pussy is just one word. And in that, it's equating punk with the kind of gender fuckery, and also in queer sex, how we kind of often encant these very, I don't know, almost heteronormative words like dad and mum, and kind of resituate them. And boy pussy is because, yeah, boys have pussies, and any gay person knows that. And
I like that's one word. That's so good. Boy pussy is just one word.
Yeah. And the fact that that quote starts with someone who's very skeptical about the fact that these working class POC queers can have power that extends beyond the nightclub. And the other person saying, "No, you have to see the world as yours, and other people get in your way." It's that kind of, that politics of refusal again, You have to come to everything with an idea it's your world and everyone else lives in it, I guess. But this particular chapter, I think, really kind of keys into what we're thinking about. He also goes on to say that the sound of white noise is the official national affect, the beat of a majoritarian drum that defies a minoritarian sense of rhythm. Thing 2 instructs Thing 1 and the audience to believe in one's own affective groove, one's own way of being, dancing, striving, dreaming, loving, fighting. Sounds like the L Word theme tune. And moving in the world, and to never let the affective harm of white normativity overwhelm that very important groove. So the idea of there's this kind of like drum beat that is everywhere, but that you have your own, as a minority, have your own sense of rhythm. That inevitably makes, I suppose, a remix when they're put together. Which I think someone like M.I.A. in her use of sampling, it's really clear to me that she takes kind of quite cultural landmark music and kind of metabolizes it into something else.
I was really, when I watched the documentary, and I was really like, I don't know, like I didn't know half of this stuff. Yeah. Like, did you? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, is this? I was trying to work out whether it was me being like not aware enough of like this, like music in general, but like I knew bits and pieces, obviously, about kind of like M.I.A. and the music, and kind of being Sri Lankan and all of the kind of Super Bowl and like the big kind of like highlight in a way bits. I didn't know half as like, I feel like I watched it and I was like, I watched it yesterday. Maybe it was because I was groggy because of the hour going back with the clocks, but I was just like, whoa.
Yeah. I think she's really interesting. And I think that it's also not necessary to talk about how she has said some like bullshit stuff. And but I think in terms of being an artist, she's really interesting on this kind of topic.
Yeah.
Like the famous controversy was when she said the thing about Black Lives Matter. Do you remember that? Mm-mm. She said basically that Black Lives Matter need to lift up refugees and other movements don't get as much publicity. And what she was really failing to see that refugees are also Black, or she was equating Black Lives Matter with a kind of like Western American thing. And it just was a sign of that kind of like capitalism that believes that because one movement is gaining traction, it means that other movements suffer.
Yeah, at the expense of others. Yeah.
I think though, because when you asked me to be part of this, I had just watched the M.I.A. documentary for the second time, and I thought about her performance at the 2009 Grammys, where I remember her being heavily pregnant, but my God, she is performing on her due date. Like, she got I was about to say contraptions. She got contractions that evening, and they had an ambulance waiting outside So I thought about that as a kind of spectacle of pregnancy, and also her use of sampling as a kind of rebirthing, or I don't even know if it's a rebirthing. It might be more like a kind of metabolizing of white punk into something totally different. Yeah, but that performance at the Grammys you can't find online at all.
Yeah,
like,
you said, I had a look. There's no videos, is there? There's just some pictures.
No.
And it's just
It's like when really
so
good,
much.
yeah, it's like when really good books go out of print and you're just like, there is someone who's decided this is not going to circulate anymore. And I wonder why, you know?
Yeah, that feels like such a refusal moment. To, like, if you're going to refuse enough to, like, of what pregnancy and pregnant bodies and maternity and motherhood looks like, to go perform on your due date. Like,
I know.
Why would you stop why would you kind of recall?
Yeah. Which makes you think it's not her, it's like Mr. Grammy or something who's decided for it not to be online. But I think that performance for me is just like, it's her working fucking hard, and yes, labor is labor, mothering is labor, pregnancy is labor, you know, having sex is labor. And I also read today in another essay that the kind of pregnant body is the sexual body, and what she's doing in that performance is being like, the pregnant body is the kind of performing body. And it's like, watching it, it's like it's someone working who happens to be pregnant. And I guess what she's doing is kind of like, obviously in a kind of crazy celebrity multi-million-pound fashion, kind of showing us what people do every day, which is they are forced to work whilst very, very pregnant. And I think it's because I managed to see like a very ripped kind of like video of it on YouTube that someone was like filming off their TV. And it's funny how because she's performing with men like Jay-Z, Kanye, and others, and they're all in suits, and she's in this crazy kind of like garbled version of a suit, I guess, black and white, with these spots over her breasts, her bum, and her bump, right? And even that in itself is like this kind of absurdist idea of the pregnant body that really removes M.I.A.'s physical body from the performance of being pregnant, you know? And then you've also got these men in very traditional masculine outfits, and they just seem to be kind of ignoring her a bit.
Yeah.
Like not knowing how to interact with her. It's really weird. And at one stage in the performance, she goes up to Jay-Z and does this to him. Yeah. Which just shows how, I mean, you might not like M.I.A. for whatever reason, but like she's so keyed into kind of visual clues and visual references because, you know, she started out as a filmmaker, and the first music video she made, which was for Elastica, she was just at a club and just said to two people dancing, do you want to be in this video? And she's like, she's very she has kind of fluency, this visual fluency, and it's so small on the video that you might not even notice it, but like her doing that to Jay-Z is also, I guess, yes, in a celebrity, yes, in a multi-million, but it's quite punk, because immediate people who kind of know Jay-Z's stuff know what that means, and like her doing it like not asking permission to do it. And also in the Super Bowl when she put up her middle finger and got fined like £15 million for swearing in the middle of the Madonna, you know?
Yeah.
And that is kind of like, that is like prototypical Bart Simpson punk, I suppose, to do a middle finger. And then did you hear why she did it? Because she was like, oh, I was backstage, and Madonna, who was clearly an idol of hers, had, in her mind, been reduced to this kind of nodding dog for a lot of kind of like industry bigwigs and Super Bowl people. And she was like, fuck this shit. Like, and I guess you could say, okay, but you agreed to be part of this corporate American like complete soup of awfulness. But in a way, I'm still like, I think that there is that pushback, even if it's not the kind of resistance or refusal that is necessarily gonna enact a huge difference. I think that it's still doing something. With the pregnancy performance, I then looked up some other people who had famously performed really pregnant. No one as pregnant as M.I.A. Like M.I.A. is like, oh, I've got to perform. Oh, I just happen to be like super pregnant. Like it's like, yeah. No, I looked. Cardi B performs really pregnant, but she does it for on SNL, I think, with her song "Careful." But she does it in a totally different way. She stands very still, and she's in white, which is more, I guess, when we think of kind of the Virgin Mary or like Immaculate Conceptions, or this, I mean, which is clearly done tongue-in-cheek because it's Cardi B. But she's so still that the camera actually just focuses on her, like you can't even really see she's pregnant until she starts walking. Yet with M.I.A., she's like throwing herself around the stage to the point where the camera has to see all of her. Like she's like, you're not gonna try and escape the fact I'm super pregnant. Like, just deal. And that is, it was very different to Cardi B's performance of being pregnant. And then I watched Latrice Royale. Do you watch Drag Race?
I know who that is, yeah. I know who that is. I don't really watch much Drag Race, but I do know who Latrice Royale, yeah.
Yeah. So Latrice Royale, for one Lip Sync for Your Life, performs, they've had to do a challenge where they're pregnant. So she has this very large pregnancy belly, and she performs Aretha Franklin, You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman. And it's so beautiful. And I think in very different ways, the M.I.A. performance and the Latrice Royale are doing things around pregnancy that is unexpected, and very different ways, because Latrice Royale, the performance is very much about the fact that she's pregnant and she's stroking her bump and she's tending to her bump. She's like almost connecting and communicating with this unborn child. She's singing to the child. She's also singing to God and to herself. Whereas M.I.A., it's like the bump is a prosthesis for M.I.A., yet with Latrice, the bump is absolutely real. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
That is what's incredible, because M.I.A. is like,
yeah,
the performance is not about in any way the fact she's pregnant. She just happens to be very pregnant. Yet with Latrice, the song is doing the work. The lip sync is doing the work. She is stock still in the kind of Cardi B fashion. And it's like this crazy maternal power is so charged in her. And interestingly, I think this was 2013, but her dress has little circles on it in the way that M.I.A.'s does, which are also kind of like mirroring the baby bump. But again, with ideas of, and we know as queers that kind of nature is a complete construct. But the fact that the song is you make me feel like a natural woman, and you have Latrice here who is totally embodying the pregnant woman. And also the sexual woman, like that Aretha Franklin song is also saying that nature is a construct, because she's saying to her partner or lover, you have made me feel like a natural woman, not I am a natural woman, because a natural woman doesn't exist. You know, with your gender has made me feel into my gender. And then you've got Latrice Royale, who's making the song about pregnancy, but really the song is about sex. And I think putting that sexuality into pregnancy, which is sometimes really ripped from pregnancy by heteronormative discourse, because there is some discomfort around the fact that pregnant people are sexual people, and that, you know, so I think thought about together, those two very, very different performances of pregnancy are quite maybe deserve to be looked at again. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. That also, like when you were saying that also really pushes when you said that M.I.A. is acting like a prosthesis as opposed to being pregnant, and Latrice Royale is the other way around. That's also such a pushing on the audience and like spectator of that, which I think is really interesting, of like how M.I.A. just comes out and shocks an entire audience in this way, and like Jay-Z and Kanye don't know what to do with her on stage. I think it's really interesting how then it's used as this kind of like, it's the refusal and the kind of shock and everything that comes with not knowing what to do with that, because it's so too far out of what we're used to, in the same way that Latrice Royale has gone too far with what we know is a prosthetic. I think it makes this kind of like spectator performer, I think, a really interesting kind of like, again, like a kind of remixing of what that is and who is spectating anymore and who is partaking in this performance. That's really interesting, yeah. Because I was also, because the video, if anything, when you said you couldn't find video, and I couldn't find it either, of the M.I.A., I really wanted to look to see the audience and to see kind of what was happening with the production, and how did she also, thinking about nightlife as not just music, but also, like you said, how she's moving, what she's wearing, how she's communicating on stage with others or audience. I feel like this, also how is the stage built? All of these things that like add to and are part of club technology, like separate club technologies in this way that make this, like how is she confronting them in all these ways? But like, yeah,
it's so true, because that performance was, I suppose, okay, it wasn't in a club, but lots of the kind of hallmarks of the club were there, you know, the stage, the music, the audience, the DJs, the soundtrack, and that I guess in normative terms we are not used to seeing or being with children or very heavily visibly pregnant people in the club setting.
And what would we do if we did see someone? We would try and look after them, you know? We would try and shut down the moment in a way, I can imagine, from like a wanting to be caring or wanting to kind of give support. I feel like it's the very easy, similarly comes up, I feel like a lot in queer or trans or disabled discourse of trying to show care actually doesn't look always like being caring, quote unquote. Like, in that moment, M.I.A. does, if that was happening, M.I.A. wants to be there. And there is like her agency and refusal is by being on that stage. But if she was in the club not performing, we would be trying to get her out. And it's like...
It's so true. Like, and then I was thinking about kind of autonomy and pregnancy. And like, the pregnant body not being one's own body, and that autonomy becomes a sort of lie. And to go back to what you were saying, it's like, yeah, there is this weird kind of misplaced drive to kind of be like, oh, are you okay? Do sit down or something. Because, you know, you've seen on like EastEnders or something, oh, not in your condition. You know what I mean? It's like, well, I think it's really for the person in that condition to decide what they can or cannot do, you know? But yeah, and then you also project, I suppose, in something like a club setting, you sort of project your weird morals around, weirdly, maybe there's some sort of like psychological disjunct that happens when you see someone very pregnant. You also imagine their unborn child being born, right? So you're like, oh, well, this isn't a space for children. And you have a child inside you, even though that child is not like, cannot like fall over or get accidentally spiked or like whatever, because the child is inside you. So it's like, yeah, you can really, as the pregnant person, do all the things you can do as a not pregnant person, I guess, bar like take loads of drugs. But for whatever reason, the kind of onlooker will foist a kind of moral position on it. And this was what I was thinking when I watched this pregnancy porn. I think I was telling you that my friend gave me a link to this pregnancy porn, which is like a trans guy and his partner having sex, and also talking about their experience of like making this porn. And yeah, and again, it's like the pregnant body is absolutely the sexual body. Like the pregnant body should not be gendered, but it is maybe useful to think of the pregnant body as a sexual body. But again, it's like, ooh, is the baby okay? Like all of this that hasn't really been confirmed. Is like, that's, yeah, it's just why, and I think it's to do with like, for whatever reason, connecting this pregnant body with a child, which is dodgy. It's maybe dodgy. But I did think also when I was watching the porn, like, fuck, your body changes so much. Like, like, and as a trans person as well, it's like, like there is obviously no such thing as kind of fixity and stuff, but when stuff happens, I guess, quite quickly, it is a bit of a trip. Like, I think when I first started tea, I was like, oh, I did actually have to stop it for a little bit, because I was like, oh, this is really quick. And I think that this is a trans person who is like 8 months pregnant, and your body changing so rapidly, so quickly, must be a huge trip for anyone. But I think
yeah, and it also, like, that, thinking about timelines, I'm also thinking about the fact that, like, when you said about tea, like how long the person in the porn probably had to wait to get that prescription to be able to have the change that they desired, in complete contrast to the pregnant body change, which is 9 months, you know? Like, this kind of, like, what we know is like trans healthcare wait times are obviously horrendous, and the new stuff coming out about the graphs that everyone was sharing, where new patients now are going to potentially take, like, new people now on the wait list 26 years or whatever. Like, obviously that's also not, you know, that's not obviously like gonna be the case always. Like, but like people living with 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 year wait times for these things, and then you have the pregnant body, which ultimately both happens so fast, like you said, this transformation, and then potentially snaps back so quickly, of it being like, how does that kind of timeline work when you're running on this, you know, trans time?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and also listening to the performers. They're called Poodle Mix and Jasper Lowe, I think, both of the people in this porn, and them also like feeling the way, and Freddie McConnell actually described it too in Seahorse, just like feeling very different and like kind of connecting with their bodies in a different way and in a kind of like emotional way. Like in the porn, he was talking about being fisted and also in preparation almost for giving birth, right? Like, which is a kind of amazing thing. And yeah, and to become pregnant, you have to go off testosterone. So your body is kind of changing in so many ways. That kind of why I think that trans pregnancy, I guess, which can be lots of things, but the trans pregnant body, I suppose I'm thinking about why it maybe can teach us lots about letting go of autonomy. Mm-hmm. Whereas in every pregnant body, autonomy is a lie because the baby is so dependent on the pregnant person, and like there is this parasitic host sort of relationship. But I think for the trans person who in so many cases has kind of, if they've decided to medically transition, has kind of like made real active choices about their body, who then has to kind of let go of so much, is also can maybe teach us something about that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of at the minute, I think when I'm thinking about kind of narratives as well, like this kind of trans timelines and trans narratives of what this looks like. For me, I'm also thinking about that both of these timelines, like a trans timeline and a pregnant timeline, are seen so much within kind of like a doctor's medical complex kind of framing. And you know, again, thinking about how what we said earlier of transition timelines now being almost something where you do one thing and you do the next and do the next, as opposed to kind of like saying, you know, I don't want to do any of these or all of these or some, or I want to do them in a different order, or like both of them. It's both like you said, an interesting way of thinking about not having autonomy of the body, but also handing it over in a way, and the complex relationship, I think, that within like trans individuals and trans communities kind of have to medical and doctoring and all of the things that come with these conflicted spaces, but are also seen as kind of like holding the potential of like what is wanted. It feels very like Lauren Ballon's Cruel Optimism, like they're telling us they hold everything, but they don't in this way, and they can never do, because it is ultimately a medical industrial complex that is now just profiting off trans people and trans desires, which ultimately, you know, in so many ways isn't wrong at all and isn't bad and is great and is like a trans prospering and flourishing of people inhabiting their bodies and how they want and need to do, right? But I'm thinking about that with the pregnancy, and it all seems very...
Yeah, because birthing in this schema is not something that's ever done solely alone or with a partner, especially for queer people. Like you have to rub up against healthcare systems which are notoriously transphobic, homophobic, fucking expensive, classist. And just take, like you say, I mean, it is just abominable. And we've spoken about it before, but like, it's getting worse for trans people to access services.
That's why I liked you saying about the Latrice Royale in that way of being like, of putting that, holding that in the same place and the same kind of like time as M.I.A, of being like both are heavily pregnant, in like, but also using this pathetic way of being like, it's interesting that like both of those bodies then, whether it's a prosthetic or it's this kind of like due date performance of M.I.A, both of them seem out of place on this kind of performance space. Both of them kind of make the audience want to be like, oh, is everything okay?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, well, contained within Latrice's is, I guess, the yearning in the song to be fulfilled. And it's, yeah.
It's funny, the boy child thing's funny, because it was the, so I feel like I've been watching this shaky 3-minute handheld like camera phone in the crowd recording of this boy child performance, like, you know, on and off for the best part of a year now. And I just find it, I don't know. But yeah, it was a 2013 a boy child performance to a Cyril Hahn remix of Say My Name by Destiny's Child, of course, as part of the Mickey Blanco tour. And I feel like I can't even remember where I first started watching it, but I feel like I've been watching it on and off for so long, and it just, there's something, it all came for me kind of tied together a lot with thinking about birthing and remixing at the same point that kind of the chaos at the start of like March 2020 with all of kind of COVID and pandemic kind of panic, kind of where we have this kind of like very intense moving of information between like social and political and medical narratives, and everything's like this really amped up, and there's this real panic like at the very start when people were like rushing to supermarkets and buying like thousands of blue rolls, and this really amped up affective atmosphere. And then at the same point in like April 2020, the New York Times were reporting that they were trialing estrogen as a treatment for male COVID patients because female COVID patients were recovering quicker and with faster, and there was more deaths in males. So they were trialing hormone replacement therapies as COVID treatment. At the same point that you've got people like Trump and Liz Truss and obviously Hungarian government, everyone's like coming out with their anti-trans kind of like, you know, policies and everything to revoke rights. And at the same time, you've got these US scientists trying out basically the same thing as treatment for COVID patients. And it was kind of that falling into place with me thinking a lot about trying to not solely be dependent on trans birthing to be within medical industrial cultures of like hormones and transitioning and medical kind of interventions in this way, and thinking about how can we think about birthing as something that we do ourselves and with others in communal spaces that are more built by us for us, or kind of like geared towards more trans kind of focus by trans people. And I got started thinking about Dancefloors, and I saw this clip, and I just thought it was such a kind of thinking about remixing, the layers of remixing in that kind of performance as boy child being like a mixed gender, mixed race performer on using a Say My Name track that's already been remixed by Cyril Hahn, who's got like a different voice overlay to the track anyway. It's a genderless voice. And kind of like this Mickey Blanco tour, who is like a queer HIV positive rapper, who's always like, all of these things are like spinning in this way that like, it feels like things have got more movement, and it feels like there's more space and possibility of it not being this kind of fixed idea of what any of those things should be, what like the song should be, or how it should be listened to, or how it should be performed, or on whose tour. And like all of those things felt really kind of interestingly like held aloft in this kind of like moment of being like, oh, like breath almost. And like I've shown this clip to a few people, and it's always been such an interesting reaction of being like, there's so many things happening, there's so much movement. And it's like, I'm thinking about how those layers of remixing work as kind of like also remixing the space between performer and audience in the same way that like I think the M.I.A. stuff and the Latrice Royale does. And that all of these things happen while Boy Child is performing, but not dancing quite, but kind of performing in this very like jerky, very like embodied movement, but without thinking about dance or kind of like choreography in any way. And thinking about how that dance floors in general are like something that's like so sacred to like queer and trans culture, as like, you know, places where you meet people and you meet family and you meet friends and you also hook up and you cruise. And like how interesting we could think, like how interesting it could be if we could think about dance floors as places that we birth ourselves and each other. In this very like, you have this boy child figure who's almost ventriloquizing this say my name voice, you know. Also say my name as a trans performer, like that has such a different meaning to trans people and racialized people than it, you know, does to others when we think about specifically like trans of color survival. Sorry.
No, I agree with everything you're saying, like totally. And I want to thank you for showing me that boy child, because I've seen several boy child performances, but I haven't seen that one. And what I was only going to say is that in the Rowetta text that was on Stretch Marks that I read today, I think they quote this idea that maybe it was Hannah Arendt said, I'm going to paraphrase it, but that birthing is a beginning and a newness. When I think yes, but it's also held within that as the old in the new. And that's so expertly demonstrated with the boy child, because what is happening in that performance is something, yes, we haven't encountered before, but it's also taking material that's already in the cultural washing machine and presenting it to us in a different way. So I don't believe that birthing or giving birth is always kind of a beginning. It's actually a continuation. And that continuation does not have to look like that kind of iPhone panorama. It can just be like sort of like multifaceted, multi-directional. And you wouldn't even have to know, I guess, that was the Destiny's Child song. But reimagined that way, you're right, it has such a meaning in terms of like, for a trans person to say my name. And in the thing that I've just written, which is kind of like about disco and loss, I talk a bit about Kai Isaiah Jamal's poem, Call Me By My Name. And in that poem, what they do is they're like how fucked up is it that there's this like big, well, Call Me by Your Name, the blockbuster, like that you have these two white cis gays kind of like treating it as a game. Oh, call me by another name that's not mine. Like when trans people of color have to fight to be called correctly, to have themselves pronounced correctly in so many different situations. And the club, I guess, in that very visceral way, is somewhere where a queer person can feel like they are seen or heard, and
or seen and heard as they want to be, right? I think there's something like different. I'm thinking about Madison Moore's recent book called Fabulous, talking about nightclubs, and he says that nightclubs are all about storytelling, and like the idea that they're just portals to another world of, you know, make believe if you want them to be, or you don't need to be who you walk in as. So like in that kind of like, I'm a trans kind of like thinking, you know, I guess that could be, you can enter this queer trans club and be exactly the name you want, or the you know, like you can escape just slightly, because obviously, because he also talks about nightclubs also not being these amazing space, they're not these utopian spaces where everything's great. They also have door policies, and they have nightclub entry fees, and they have security and CCTV. Like these aren't like utopias, but they kind of shifted the needle a little bit more in a queer favor sometimes, if they're queer owned or queer run, or but Madison Moore was really stuff about storytelling. So like you can escape a little bit more, and you can use this name you want, or you can use the pronouns you wish, or present in the fashion that you attire, whatever you wish. But also in the kind of like, I'm thinking also about if it's storytelling, you could be a different person every night. We could go to a different club and be a different trans person every night, or you can, like, I feel like so often as well, if we're thinking about trans stories and trans narratives, it's like the creativity sometimes get lost when we're also being pushed for pronouns and being pushed for status of like, what is like your, how do you feel about this, or how is the, like, what part of the transition are you in, like all of these things. I think there's something interesting also about thinking about it as a storytelling. So that in the same way, like if trans birthing, if I'm saying birthing, we're birthing ourselves and each other on dance floors, and that's my story, right? Whether it's like, what's the, like, obviously it can't be proved in the way you got, like, you guys want birthing to be proved, but like, what if I say I've got the stretch marks to prove it? Or like, what if, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's a really interesting, when Madison Moore talks about storytelling, I think it's really interesting. And thinking about the stretch marks channel, and like the choice of the word stretch marks, I also found really interesting. And thinking about
stretch marks,
trans stretch marks, right?
Yeah, and stretch marks are a type of scar, and kind of like scars and trans bodies are very much in sync with each other. I really like what you were saying about storytelling and night spaces, and also night spaces absolutely not being utopic.
Yeah.
Like absolutely reifying racist, gender, body idealism, all the things that we want to, wish to, hope to break out of, and also being kind of like quite pleased a lot.
Yeah.
But you saying that story thing reminds me of a friend of mine who, like, we'd go out and like every night or something in the smoking area, he'd have like a different thing he'd say to someone who came up to us. Like they'd be like, "What do you do?" And like one day he was like a video game developer, the next he was like a trapeze artist, or and yeah, it's this very kind of like ludic, it can be space where, I mean, it's quite singular in the fact that it's populated by lots of different people that yes, you see the same faces, but you also see very different faces, so that, which gives you the opportunity to also reinvent as well. And that's why I think with the boy child, what you were saying, and I think I absolutely agree, is that there is a movement in it that sort of escapes fixity. Mm-hmm. And I think that you can totally apply that to M.I.A, just kind of across her career, also across her videos, across her music. There is this kind of preoccupation with vehicles in transit, and she writes so much about the refugee experience. She is a refugee, and in Bad Girls, for instance, there's it's just the most amazing video, but like cars and bikes and just like this rapid movement, and it's like you just got to keep running, because if you stop you're going to die, you know, that sort of like this kind of mood is just really, really vividly evoked. And what I think we may not have time to talk about, but her kind of use of this kind of like the white guitar male punk again and again and again. In one song she references Roadrunner by the Modern Lovers, just like saying it in her style, like Roadrunner, Roadrunner. And it's like this thumping velocity that and you feel like the way that she uses she kind of samples or takes or just uses this kind of material, which is often like the Clash or like very, very famous punk, I suppose, in its traditional sense of the word. It's almost like she's grabbing onto kind of a phrase or something while she's busy, while she's getting to the other place, like a stepping stone. So she's gonna use that for a little bit because it's helped her get to somewhere else. Mm-hmm. I feel like, and in Paper Planes, where she doesn't sample the lyric, but she samples the hook from the Clash song Straight to Hell. And Paper Planes is all about a kind of is about hustling, I guess, or swindling, or being an immigrant and having to really, really hustle. And I think the person in the song is a passport counterfeiter. And she's taken this hook from the Clash song Straight to Hell, which is itself about the immigrant experience. So, and much like with Boy Child, where he's taken, or they have taken the Destiny's Child, and they've made it also be so poignantly about the trans experience. What M.I.A. has done in Paper Planes, which is about an immigrant experience, has taken this Clash song, which is also it's actually about the decimation of the mill industry in Lancashire and South Asian people who were basically taken over to England to work in the mills, and then the mill industry all the mills shut down, and they were essentially jobless, and then faced racism from the white working class, who were like, go straight to hell, go back to your own country, even though they were, you know. And what M.I.A. is doing in that chorus, which is like, all we want to do is take your money. It's like, it's very effectively kind of twisting back what immigrants hear all the time from white people, which is, you come here, you're taking our jobs, when actually, in the case study of the mills in the north, it was the English who brought people over because all the labour was decimated by the Second World War. Mm-hmm. And you've got all that going on in this very just skillful, just taking 8 bars.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that is a birthing in that it's a beginning, but it's I guess it's maybe a sort of reckoning with a cultural past that's also yeah.
The thing is, I would not call it birthing. Like when you just said when you said the other day, like, I don't know if M.I.A. being pregnant on stage really like fits with the birthing that you're going on about with boy child. I was like, no, I think that absolutely fits in the way of also thinking like, I don't know, I very much think of birthing also as being like an individual practice that me and you as trans people do every day, that we like do things that affirm who we want to or feel like, right? Like I think it's such also a daily practice of self like fulfillment in this way of being like, no, I'm going to birth myself again today, and I'm going to wear what I want today, and I'm going to it's stepping into the club, and you know, all of these things that I think go from those everyday practices of just sometimes getting by, right? Just getting by as a trans person in the current climate sometimes feels like an immense undertaking in the way that I think those actions where we birth ourselves and then also affirm each other within trans communities, of affirming like when someone's name changes as an example that instantly came to mind, and that is a birthing in, you know, in itself. So I don't think I think very much of this kind of, when you said about M.I.A. and this reformulating and hybridizing of this, I totally think it's birthing. And I don't think it needs to be the first in this way, because I think it's the repetition that like makes it a practice in a way. Like it's the repetition of boy child dancing to Say My Name over and over and over, because the version that they're dancing to has been altered, so Say My Name is said over and over, which I think is really interesting. It's not the Destiny's Child version, right? So it's got this genderless voice that just keeps saying it and saying it and saying it. But yeah, I think that's so interesting with M.I.A. and this kind of working class culture to like in undertones of this that is so smart. Like, because that's the other thing that I was thinking about, both of the M.I.A. and also, to be fair, that like the Latrice, Royale and the boy child, they're both at the same, all of them at the same time are so unbelievably smart, but like so playful. Like, when did like I always feel like I'm like, when do trans people get to be playful anymore? And when do we get to be joyful and like silly and like, you know, it's
God.
You do you know what I mean though? Like all of these things are such funny and humorous and playful and interesting ways of so smartly tearing it apart and remaking something completely different that speaks to a certain audience. Like the boy child performance will speak to a queer trans audience in a way that it just goes completely over the head of cisgender straight people, right? The kind of things that the registers that it's working on and the things that it's really like teasing out, I think aren't read in the same way.
No. No, they're not, and that's a really very precise engineering that means that you can also be listening or watching this performance with people who are cis and straight, and your space will still be maintained.
Like it's that's also so smart as well. If it's already built in the safety and the kind of comfort of people for whom can't engage with this publicly or with others in the same way. It's secretively built in, which I think is so interesting. In the same way that the Stretch Marks channel being called Stretch Marks, I thought was really interesting, because as a word, people will think so many different things to that. And like you said about scarring and the trans body,
and also capaciousness, or like poodle mix being wanting to be fisted like deeper and harder to kind of like stretch the capacity of what he thinks his body is capable of, which is also totally a kind of emotional, spiritual, intellectual stretching too. You know? And I think that's where we need to land, really, to go back to like the very beginning, and why people are certain TERFs are so kind of outraged by Chia. Is that, yes, of course, being trans is so much about one's body, but it's not at the same time. And that's that it's a very much a kind of emotional, spiritual, intellectual, and the body is one element of it. But it should be a kind of reimagining and a recalibrating, or a complete stretching of what we have been told and what we have been indoctrinated into by capitalist heteronormative systems of oppression that deliberately don't allow for imagining differently, which is totally bound up in the stuff we've been talking about today. The boy child, the Latrice, the way M.I.A. Kind of remakes and remixes her own kind of immigrant experience. It's like
Stretch Marks by The Agency.